Dante Reynolds hadn't seen his sister in over a year. No calls, no letters, not even a whisper about where she'd gone. Then, just like that, she showed up at Green Lake Correctional Facility one Tuesday morning. She smiled like nothing had happened, like she hadn't disappeared for 14 months. She brought cookies, sat down across from her brother like old times. But something was different. Her eyes didn't match her smile. She kept glancing at the guards. Her hands trembled when she reached for her water, and she kept saying things like, "Please don't be mad," and "I didn't know who else to turn to." 12 minutes later, she was dead, strangled, by the only family she had left. In a room full of guards, cameras, and other inmates, Dante didn't hesitate. He didn't argue. He just stood up and killed her. Why? What could a woman say to her own brother that would make him snap like that? And what happened during those 14 months she was gone? That turned a simple prison visit into a fatal confession. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Dante Reynolds had always been the protector. Growing up in a rough neighborhood just outside Philadelphia, he learned early how to fight. Not because he wanted to, but because someone had to keep the peace. And that someone was always him. At 36, he was now serving an 18-year sentence at Green Lake Correctional Facility in Pennsylvania for armed robbery. But those who knew him, truly knew him, said Dante had one weakness: his little sister, Kira. Kira Reynolds was 29, bright, beautiful. Once a regular face in her church choir, known for her kindness, her soft voice, and her stubborn loyalty to her older brother. For the first year of Dante's sentence, she visited every Sunday without fail. Then, without warning, she vanished. No phone calls, no letters, no word from anyone who knew her. For nearly 14 months, Dante heard nothing, until one day she walked back into that prison, without explanation. So what happened during those missing months? Why did she stay away for so long? And what did she tell her brother in those final moments that made him react with such sudden and brutal violence? What turned a quiet family visit into a crime scene? And why didn't Kira scream or run? Why did she just sit there like she knew what was coming? These are the questions authorities and the public have been trying to answer ever since. Dante was more than a brother. He was her protector, her hero. They grew up in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in North Philly, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and still came home exhausted. Their father had left before Kira was born, so it was always just the 3 of them. But it was Dante who held the family together. When their mom worked night shifts at the hospital, it was Dante who tucked Kira into bed, who made sure her homework was done, who walked her to school and stood outside waiting for her to come out. He was 14 when he first got jumped walking home, but even with a busted lip and swollen jaw, all he said was, "They're not touching Kira." Kira adored him. To her, Dante wasn't just a brother. He was the one person in the world who always showed up. Even when money was tight, even when their mom was too tired to speak, even when the lights got cut off for the 2nd time in a month. Dante made it feel like things were going to be okay. Kira was the opposite of the world they came from. She was quiet, disciplined, always reading, always praying. The kind of girl teachers remembered long after she left their class. She sang in the choir every Sunday, always sat in the front pew with her Bible tucked close to her chest. She made the honor roll 4 semesters in a row. There were whispers in the neighborhood that Kira was going to be the first in the family to graduate college, but life doesn't always let the good ones escape. Dante started running with a group of older boys, not because he wanted to, but because he had no other way to bring money in. Their mom had gotten sick. Bills were piling up. Kira's school fees were overdue. One bad decision turned into another. By 19, Dante was already known to police. And one night, a robbery went wrong. A convenience store clerk ended up in the hospital. Dante didn't shoot anyone, but he was holding the gun. He was sentenced to 18 years. Kira was just 18 when they took him away. And still, she never stopped showing up. Every Sunday for 5 years straight, She sat on the other side of the glass, talking to him about church, about work, about how she was trying to save up for nursing school. She never judged him. She never stopped calling him Big Bro. And then, just like that, she disappeared. No letters, no calls, no visits. Dante asked the guards every week if his name was on the visitation list. It never was. He wrote letters. They came back unopened. He even tried calling old friends, relatives. Nobody had seen her. For over a year, Kira was gone. And then, she walked in. With a smile he didn't recognize, and a secret she couldn't carry anymore. The day Kira returned to Green Lake was like any other visiting day, at least on the surface. She signed in like everyone else, took off her jewelry, stepped through security with barely a word. But it wasn't the same Kira the staff remembered. This time, she came in wearing a soft beige trench coat over a fitted designer blouse. Makeup perfectly done, shoes that looked expensive. She smelled like perfume no one could place, something sweet, sharp, and unfamiliar. When Dante walked into the visiting room and saw her sitting there, his steps slowed. His face softened for a moment. You could tell he had been waiting for this day for months. Maybe he thought she'd come to apologize. Maybe he thought she'd finally explain why she left. But from the moment he sat down, something was off. She avoided eye contact, spoke in half sentences, gave quick smiles that faded too fast. Every time Dante leaned in to ask something, she'd glance nervously at the guards. He asked where she'd been. She said, "It's complicated." He asked if she was okay. She said, "I'm fine. I just can't talk about it here." According to one of the correctional officers who witnessed it, she looked scared. He looked betrayed. And then Dante reached into a thick envelope he'd brought with him. Inside were printouts, dozens of them, screenshots from Escort websites, ads, listings, photos, names, rates. And in the center of all of them, Kira, wearing wigs, using fake names, but unmistakably her. She froze. Her hands began to shake. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't deny it. She didn't say a word. And that's when it happened. Dante stood up so fast the table jolted. Inmates around them flinched. A plastic tray crashed to the floor. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He just reached into his waistband and pulled out a sharpened comb, filed down to a deadly point. In one motion he lunged across the table. The comb sank deep into her neck. She gasped, choking on her own blood, trying to push him away. He stabbed her again, and again. Guards rushed in, chairs flew, the room erupted in screams. But by the time they dragged him off her, there was nothing they could do. Kira Reynolds died on the floor of that visiting room, in her brother's arms. But how did Dante find out? Who sent him those pictures? And the question that still haunts investigators, why did Kira come back at all? What was she trying to tell him before he cut her off, forever? In the days that followed Kira Reynolds' murder, investigators combed through every angle of her disappearance and death, trying to make sense of what had driven her brother to such a brutal and public act of violence. But what they found didn't lead to easy answers. Instead, it uncovered a life Kira had kept deeply hidden, a life she never wanted Dante to see. The first breakthrough came from inside the prison walls. An inmate, whose name was redacted from the official report, admitted during questioning that he had slipped Dante the printouts weeks before the murder. Someone had slid them under his cell door late one night, folded inside a manila envelope. When asked who gave them to him, he refused to answer, but another inmate said Dante had become withdrawn after receiving that envelope. Stopped talking to anyone. Just sat on his bunk, staring at the same 3 photos over and over. Then came the whispers, rumors that one of the correctional staff, a low-ranking officer, had once bragged about hiring an escort who used to be all churchy. The officer never confirmed it. In fact, he denied ever knowing Kira. But his phone records told a different story. When detectives traced Kira's last known address, it led them to a rundown apartment in Camden, New Jersey. Rent was paid in cash. The lease was under a false name. one of 3 aliases she had been using. Neighbors knew her only as Tasha. Quiet girl, kept to herself. Came and went at odd hours. She hadn't told a soul she had a brother in prison. Her digital trail was even more haunting. Multiple burner phones, some active, others wiped. Email accounts linked to Escort service profiles. Dozens of hotel receipts across 3 states. There were messages from clients, requests, reviews, payments. But nowhere in any of it was there a trace of who she used to be. One detective said quietly, she was desperate, jobless, alone, and ashamed to tell her brother. But not everything lined up. Some of the Escort ads had been posted using a separate IP address. One traced back to a man currently under investigation for trafficking. There were small clues, appointments Kira never confirmed, long gaps in communication, charges she never collected. Was she doing this on her own, or was someone pulling the strings? One of the caseworkers involved said it plainly. We couldn't tell if she was surviving, or if she had started to believe this was who she was now. Was she forced into this life? Did she do it for money? Or had she become someone her brother could no longer recognize? These are the questions that haunted not just investigators, but the community, their family, and even fellow inmates who had watched the entire tragedy unfold from just a few feet away. And still, the biggest question remained. Why did she come back? Why walk into that room, carrying a secret she knew could destroy the one person who loved her most? The turning point in the investigation didn't come from a witness or a confession. It came from a paper trail. A quietly filed request from Internal Affairs asked Green Lake Correctional Facility to release 6 months of visitor logs, surveillance footage, and employee access records. Most of it was routine. Until one name kept surfacing again and again in places it shouldn't have been. Officer Brett Mallory, a longtime staff member. No prior complaints, no write-ups, no reason for suspicion. Except there he was, clocking out of his shift at 7 p.m. and showing up 40 minutes later at a budget motel just across the state line. Room 209, booked under a different name each time. Security cameras captured him entering, and just minutes after, a woman, wearing sunglasses at night and a hoodie pulled tight over her head, would walk in behind him. Facial recognition confirmed what family and friends refused to believe. It was Kira, and it wasn't just once. There were 3 separate visits. Same pattern, same hotel, same man. But the investigation didn't stop there. Detectives pulled text messages from Mallory's confiscated phone. The tone of the messages changed over time. What started as flirtation quickly turned dark. Demands, threats, voice memos. One audio clip was just 12 seconds long, but it changed everything. It was Kira, her voice shaking, whispering, "Please don't send those pictures to anyone. I'll stop visiting him. Just don't let him see me like this." She was being blackmailed. The conditions were clear. If she continued visiting her brother, the officer would release her Escort ads publicly, ruining her reputation, destroying her safety, and worst of all, breaking the bond she'd fought to protect. So she stopped coming. Not because she didn't care, not because she had moved on, but because she was trying to shield Dante from the truth of what her life had become. What no one could explain is why she came back. Some say she had finally worked up the courage to tell him everything, that she wanted to look her brother in the eye and admit what she'd been through. Others believe she already knew he'd seen the pictures and simply didn't want to die with a lie between them. When Dante was finally questioned under oath, his words were cold and clear. She was my blood, and they turned her into this. I had to end it. He didn't plead temporary insanity. He didn't beg for forgiveness. But what the court would later reveal added another layer to the tragedy. Inside Dante's cell, correctional officers found a small weapon, crafted from a plastic comb. Its teeth were filed down into fine points. The handle was wrapped in fabric torn from a bedsheet. He hadn't made it in a fit of rage. He had carved it over several days, every night under his blanket, quietly preparing for what he knew, deep down, was coming. The prosecution called it premeditated murder. They laid out a timeline. When he received the photos, when he stopped speaking to other inmates, when he sharpened the comb, the emails he sent to himself, the journal entry titled simply, "If it's true." The defense painted a different picture. They brought in psychologists, childhood friends, a former pastor. They spoke of trauma, of guilt, of the deep emotional rupture that happens when the only person you love shows up in a life you never imagined for them. They called it a crime of passion. But nothing they said could explain the way Dante sat in court. Still, staring forward, only blinking when Kira's name was mentioned. Then, during the final week of the trial, the judge allowed Dante to speak. And that's when everything changed. He stood, shackled, shoulders heavy like he was carrying the entire weight of their shared past. His voice didn't shake, but it wasn't steady either. He looked out at the courtroom, looked at the jury, looked at the empty bench where his mother once sat before she stopped coming. And then he said, "I didn't kill my sister. I killed what they did to her." Silence. Total, suffocating silence. He continued, "Every night in that cell, I prayed she was okay. I imagined her working in a hospital or in church. I kept telling myself she stopped writing because she was too busy. I thought she had a life, a real one. But then I saw those pictures, and I saw her face, and it wasn't her anymore." By the time he finished speaking, he was in tears. Not the kind that fall slowly, the kind that take everything out of a man. The judge called for a recess. Some jurors wept. Even the courtroom reporter paused her typing. That single moment reframed the entire case, not just as a murder, but as the final chapter in a long, slow unraveling of two lives that once clung to each other through everything, until shame, power, and silence tore them apart. A week after the courtroom lights dimmed and the verdict was read aloud, a quiet discovery was made, one that never made the headlines, but said more than any testimony ever could. A junior clerk in the evidence room was cataloging Kira's personal belongings when she found it. Folded between a half-empty pack of gum and a church program dated months earlier was a piece of stationery, creased down the middle, soft at the edges, and written in careful, unsure handwriting. It wasn't in an envelope. It wasn't addressed formally. Just one word, written in large letters across the top. Dante. The ink bled slightly at the corners, as if it had been touched by tears or clutched too long by shaking hands. But the words were still there. Fragile, heartbreaking, final. She wrote, "I know you'll never understand why I did what I did, and maybe I'll never be able to explain it in a way that makes sense. But I want you to know, I never forgot about you. Not for a day. I stayed away to protect you, to protect the way you see me. I didn't want you to look at me and see what I became. I wanted you to remember me the way I used to be, the way you made me feel, like I mattered, like I was pure. I'm sorry I let you down, Dante, but I wanted to see you one last time, as me." That was it. No signature, no date, just those words, left unsaid at the bottom of her purse. When they brought the letter to Dante, he didn't speak. He didn't even blink. He read it once, folded it back carefully, then held it to his chest as though it were the last part of her he could still protect. Then he looked up and asked to be returned to his cell. There was no legal drama in the sentencing, no appeals, no petitions. The judge ruled swiftly. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was over, at least on paper, but outside that courtroom nothing really ended. Kira's memory became a battlefield, one where strangers and loved ones alike argued over what kind of woman she really was. Some spoke of disappointment, of shame, of a girl who turned her back on the faith she was raised in. The church she once sang in every Sunday chose not to honor her name during service. Her choir robe was folded away, quietly removed from the rack as if she had never worn it. Others saw something else, something deeper. They saw a girl who had been abandoned by the system, who slipped into a life she didn't choose, driven by fear, by desperation, by the shame of telling the truth to the one person she loved the most. They called her a victim, not just of exploitation, but of silence. As for the Reynolds family, there were no interviews, no press statements. The house where they grew up went dark, curtains drawn, doors locked. Neighbors say their mother stopped going to work, stopped going to church, stopped answering the door. A home once filled with two voices, laughing, arguing, protecting each other, was now filled with silence. And Dante, the boy who once shielded his sister from schoolyard bullies and nighttime fears, now wakes up every day in a cell where nothing exists but time. Time to remember, time to regret, time to read a letter that came too late. But even now, people still ask the same questions. How far would you go to protect someone you love? Would you lie for them? Would you fight for them? Would you forgive them if the truth shattered everything you believed about them? And what happens when the person you'd do anything to save is already gone? We often talk about justice, about punishment, about right and wrong. But life doesn't always separate those things cleanly. Sometimes love and pain wear the same face. Sometimes the deepest wounds come not from strangers, but from the people we would have died for. So we leave you with this. What do you think? Was Dante a murderer, or a broken brother pushed beyond the brink? Was Kira selfish for hiding the truth, or was she trying to protect him the only way she knew how? If this happened in your family, if someone you loved came back carrying this kind of secret, what would you do? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if it made you think, then please subscribe so you never miss the stories we share, because sometimes the quietest voices are the ones that need to be heard the most. So now you've heard it all: the brother, the sister, the secret that shattered them both, a bond that was once unbreakable, torn apart by silence, shame, and a truth too twisted to bear. But let's not forget, this wasn't just a story about a murder. This was about love, about betrayal, about what happens when the one person you swore to protect becomes unrecognizable. Now we turn to you. Do you believe Dante acted out of love or hatred? Was he trying to protect the only family he had left, or punish her for becoming someone he no longer understood? And what about Kira? Was she living a lie, or simply surviving the only way she knew how? Should we blame her? Or should we blame the system that cornered her into becoming something she wasn't? Tell us what you think in the comments below. We want to hear from real people, from those who've lived through pain, sacrifice, loyalty, and from those who know what it's like to love someone so much it hurts. We read every single comment because your voice is just as powerful as the story we tell. And if you think this story was heartbreaking, wait until you hear what we uncovered next. A respected pastor, a grieving congregation, and a horrifying secret. He didn't just preach about family values, he redefined them. He murdered his wife and married his own daughter. And that's only the beginning. That story is coming. And when it drops, it'll shake everything you thought you knew about love, power, and control. So don't just scroll past this. Hit that subscribe button right now. Because the truth, it's never what it seems. And in this world of hidden sins and buried secrets, you'll want to be the first to know what's coming next. Tap the bell icon too, so you never miss an episode, because we're not done yet. This is where justice stumbles, where morality blurs, and where love sometimes kills. Subscribe. Stay with us. We've only just begun.